You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Weiner. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. Feels like 500 years ago, but really is just January of this year. I had the opportunity to give a keynote address at one of my favorite conferences in Los Angeles. It is the Brentwood School's It's Our Turn conference. It happens every 2 years. I've been a part of this conference since its inception. It's student run and created, and it is designed to bring empowering and inspiring women together with equally empowering and inspiring young women in schools from across Los Angeles. So I was so excited to be there. And this year, because I had started recording and bringing into life this podcast, we decided to bring the podcast to the school. So you're watching me right now on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm in my studio in Los Angeles, but this episode was actually filmed on location at the Brentwood School in January of this year. And my two guests were speakers at that program, one of whom I know well, the other was a complete stranger to me. So I'm excited to tell you their backgrounds. Today's guests are Iskra Lawrence and Ibtihaj Muhammad. So let me tell you about Iskra. Iskra I know through our work together with the Aerie Real Role Models. Aerie, a wonderful brand partner of mine. Iskra's been a role model of theirs, I think probably 5 years now at this point. She's really a name and face for the brand. She herself is a body positive activist. She's an entrepreneur and a businesswoman. She advocates quite a bit for self-love and mental well-being. She sits on a tremendous social media platform where she speaks a lot about eating disorders and eating disorders recovery, something that's very near and dear to her life. She actually is an ambassador for the National Eating Disorders Association. And when I was talking to Iskra back in January, she was pregnant with her first child. And so this April, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy with her partner, Philip. And so when we are talking to Iskra in this conversation, she is sort of, I think, almost towards the end of her pregnancy, and she shares very candidly about what that was like for her. So I can't wait for you to meet and hear more from Iskra. And Ibtihaj Muhammad, I have only really fangirled about in the past. I was so excited to be speaking on a panel with her. You also may know Ibtihaj because she's an entrepreneur, an activist, a best-selling author. You also may know her because she's an Olympic medalist in fencing. And in 2016, she made history as the first American woman to compete in the Olympics wearing a hijab. So she is incredibly inspiring and groundbreaking. She's the founder of Luella, which is a modest clothing fashion brand that she runs with her sisters. And for me, Ibtihaj also, I was fangirling over because my work with Mattel, as many of you know, I work and advise on the Barbie brand. Barbie, we made the first ever Barbie wearing a hijab dedicated to Ibtihaj, inspired by Ibtihaj Muhammad for our Shiro's collection. So I've known about her. I was going to speak on a panel with her at this event, and we're standing backstage. And I just started telling her, what I was here doing and that I had brought my team with me and we were recording this podcast. I said, hey, I'm starting a podcast about life and death and everything in between. You want to talk to me? And she said, yes. And so literally I whisked her away after our panel into this little classroom at this school where we had set up the podcast. And Iskra, Ibtihaj, and I entered into such a dynamic conversation. Again, I didn't really know Ibtihaj before sitting down with her. I was so humbled by her saying yes, but I was even more humbled by what she chose to share in our conversation. She lost her sister recently, a fact I did not know before we sat down, and she went there with us and shared about that loss. And I think about the opportunity to sit down and have such candid conversations with inspiring people. And that's exactly what I wanted to do with this program. Iskra also shares some really incredible stories in here, some of which she says she's not shared publicly before. So we really went there. And I think that's what you're going to find in this program, that no matter where we are, whether we're on location or in this studio or now via Zoom, the folks on this program, they come on to be transparent, to be authentic, to talk about life, death, and everything in between. And when we talk about all those other things, life, career, relationships, you'll find a through line. And that through line is that everybody is really just trying to live a life that they love on terms that they value, and with relationships that really matter to them. And both Iskra and Ibtihaj are wonderful role models for that. So I can't wait for you to hear our conversation today. Let's dig in with Iskra and Ibtihaj. So welcome. I feel so formal. This was not my intention was to create this sort of formal conversation, but when I was thinking about doing this podcast, right? I had done one before called Talk to Jess, which was all about change makers, and I talked to incredible people, and I've heard wonderful stories from people. And then there was always something missing. And Iskra, you and I have talked about this in the past, like we kind of show the glossy side of the things that we're doing in the world. So anyway, the evolution of this podcast was really about like, what's the truth that guides me the most in my life, that kind of gives me urgency. And a couple years ago, I lost people that I really loved in my life that kind of wakes you up, I think, when you have that. I'm also in middle age, so I get to the space and place of life where you're like, oh boy, this is like really important. And so I wanted to talk to people that I admire and that I love and know, or I'm getting to know, and really kind of hopefully go a layer deeper so that we can, I talk about loving a little more, like digging a little deeper and learning something about ourselves. So I want to start with our origin stories. So I have Iskra and Ibtihaj here, which is sort of like dreamy. Do you know anything about your birth story? Do you know about how you were born, when you were born? Any story about that?
I mean, I know that where I grew up, in a place called Wolverhampton, had the highest infant birth mortality rate, in the sense that they would drop babies and they would do really awful. Yeah, it was like really awful quality hospital. Wow. And my parents were students. They were young. They lived in a flat with like a shared bathroom. And they, out of all of, I guess, anything stacked against them, the thing that they did right was they loved me unconditionally. Wow. And they gave everything to make sure that I had whatever I needed. And that's why they only had one child, actually, because they decided that we want to try and give her everything we can, and we wouldn't be able to afford to do that for two children. So they were very, very selfless. My mom quit school and worked in a library, and my dad stayed in school.
Wow.
And so I definitely think that my birth story was, again, it was just like, they made it work, and you can. And when you have a great partnership, which they did, and I'm so lucky that they are still in that incredible partnership. And
how long have they been married now?
Well, they've never been married either.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my parents never got married.
Interesting. Okay.
Again, because they said that they couldn't afford to get married, and they'd rather spend it on my education or me doing, if I want to try swimming, if I want to try dancing, if I want to try gymnastics. So I got to try everything.
So they were really intentional and thougoughly about how they were going to parent you in the world. Yeah. That's tremendous.
How do they refer to one another?
They just like my love or my partner.
Do they say, they don't say husband and wife?
They will do to make it easier sometimes.
Because it's too much of a story to get into for randos.
Like,
right? But that's so interesting because do you know what day you were born on or what time? What's your sign? I forget.
I'm 3 a.m. I was born 3 a.m. and I'm September 11th.
Oh, wow.
I'm a Virgo, same as my mom. Yeah, she's August 26th.
Wow. Amazing. What about you, Ibtihaj? What do you know about your birth story?
That I'm in the middle of 5.
Wow,
right. So I'm my mom's third child, and my mom loved being pregnant, loved having kids. She's an educator, and she always took time off with each child.
Wow.
My dad just really busted his ass to provide while my mom wasn't working on maternity leave. He would have 2 or 3 jobs. He's a police officer.
Okay.
And I would say that outside of my mom's affinity for being pregnant and having children, she was just such a nurturer, and she's just a super kind person. And at the same time, I feel like my parents had this really cool balance of providing that love and nurturing environment, but at the same time knowing when and where to push, so this idea of mediocrity just wasn't accepted in our household.
Yeah.
And I think for some people that would be really tough. But for me, I felt like I knew what was expected, So I had to, it was super clear. And I feel like it kind of shaped who I am.
Yeah. But I hear in both of your stories, too, the intentionality behind your parents, the way your parents alternated responsibilities with children and kind of the intentionality of setting up what was expected in the family. I'm just always interested when I see high-performing people, right? I'm always curious just a little bit about how we came into
It sounds
the
like
world.
they also really valued each other's roles as well. And they allowed each other to figure out what was important to them. And I think that that's, as I go through my relationships and navigate them and figure out that you can be with a partner who wants something and then that can change in 6 months' time. And like figuring out how you keep evolving together and allowing someone to keep refining themselves and keep pursuing these new dreams and goals and aspirations.
Yeah. I was born on Halloween, 3:08 in the afternoon, and the story I was told about my birth, and my mom had a natural birth, so no gas,
Same
no
as mine.
medicine, no, right? But what I was told was when I came out, I had a full head of hair, and I pooped on my dad.
That's when I pooped too. That's when I pooped.
Those were the stories that I grew up with
I
hearing about.
continue to poop to this day. One of my favorite things.
We're already going deep. Yes, thank you for that. No, but like I think about like I'm a Scorpio through and through, like this fascination with like transformation and change, I think. And my parents were older when, I mean, they were 28 when they had me, but in their generation that was older for them. And my mom felt like an older mom. All her friends had kids when they were like 19 or 20, 21. So I also grew up with that sort of story about like waiting until it was right, waiting to, you know, for that moment. If you could think about your childhood in 3 words, how would you describe it?
Ooh.
Wow, it's such a good question, right?
Just do top of your head. Like, what would you think?
Top of my head, I would say active,
Same. Yeah.
tears.
Ooh.
I had an older brother, so I cried every day, like messing around with this knucklehead. It's funny, but like tears in a, like, I mean, I feel like it has such negative connotations attached to tears, but I don't know. I
love 'em.
expressed myself.
felt, yeah,
through,
you felt.
Yeah, I wore. I guess the best way to describe it, I wore my emotions like on my sleeves all the time, and now I don't cry ever. I don't know. I'm like.
That's interesting, but I think that's normal too.
Right.
Yeah.
But like as a child, I cried a lot. But I would say like active, tears, and just super driven. I've always been like the most driven person.
Even
I
as a little
agree.
one.
Well, I don't know if it's like a middle child. I don't know.
I was going to ask about when were you born though? What's your sign? Do you know?
I don't really do signs,
Yeah,
but I was
understood.
born December 4th.
December
I don't know what that
4th.
means,
I don't know
but
what that is. I'm just curious because I feel like I'm learning about that a little bit more. So middle child, so tears, active, and driven.
yeah.
That's really interesting. How would you describe yours?
I would say curious, adventurous, and independent.
Interesting.
I was very much, I remember I would refuse to accept a kid's menu. I was like, no. And this is like age 3.
Yeah.
Like, I would like the adults menu, please. I was
Why
just
is that not a far stretch to think about for you, actually?
But do you think that stems from being an only child and like?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, my grandma and my honorary granddad, who's my grandma's best friend at the time, they would just take me out and I would, you know, go up to the bar myself. Like it was people really let me be independent, which was great. And I enjoyed it. And I wanted to be one of the adults. And I think maybe because I didn't have siblings, my parents always brought me into their adult situations. Because I was never really with other younger kids. I was kind of having to do more adult stuff. So I feel like that
Which
made
you
me
hear a
mature
lot from
quickly.
only children too, they say. So if I could describe mine in 3 words, I would say strong-willed. Because I think these are stories that I've been told, but I also think this about myself. Like I did have that sort of like directive there. Silly. It's really silly. And I would also say, emotional. And when you were talking about tears, what really struck me is like in my work, like just my self-work over my life, I've changed the way I look at tears also. I find like I write the word emotion as like emotion, it's energy in motion. Like it needs to move through your body.
Love that.
Like I just feel like, and we get a bad rap I think for women in general when we cry, but I think as a kid too, like I was a really feeling, sensitive, intuitive little soul.
Well, I'm already reading these books and there's so many stories about, you know, a good child with good behavior is one who sleeps and is quiet and who is, and then, to me that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Like I want my child to be able to know that they can be vocal, and if they need to be emotional, express themselves, and I want to be able to understand and get to learn. I want them to be silent and feel like they have to sit in the corner and be this good child.
Right.
So really kind of unpacking that is really interesting.
Yeah, and to be intentional. I think that's what strikes me about you and Philip too. Like I think, and the thought that you said that your parents gave to how they wanted to raise you, I can see that just in what I know of you and him, of this kind of intentionality. If you could look back at your childhood now, like what is something now as an adult that you've seen differently about you as a child? Or is there a point of view that you've changed about you as a child? I'll give you an example. For me, obviously, I think Iskra and I share this. I don't know about you, Ibtihaj, if this feels the same for you, but I clearly struggled with my looks when I was a kid. I had sort of curly, unruly hair and buck teeth and caramel skin that I didn't see sort of anywhere at the time. Like I felt like I was odd and off. And then, you know, we're here at the Brentwood conference today. We're speaking to these young women about self-confidence. And when I went home to look at pictures, you know, of myself, and I've seen them over the years, but something I think in some of my recovery and life process now, like when I look at those pictures, I see such a beautiful, sweet, like unique child that I look back now and I think all the stories I told myself and stories that were told to me about my appearance are false, you know, that there is a way for me to kind of change the way that I look at how much life I had. Not that I was sort of, you know, odd or different or off, but I was just me.
Right.
You know, so I'm just curious, like if you've had sort of an adult recognition of something in your life, it doesn't have to be negative, but just something that you've learned about your childhood now that you didn't see when you were little Ibtihaj or little Iskra.
Yeah. I felt like that sense of othering, I can totally relate to that. I felt that a lot. And it didn't always come like outside. It didn't always come from outside. Like sometimes it would come from like a family member.
Yes.
Like I remember I have 2 aunts that I can think of that always make comments about, and I talked about this on stage, but make comments about my legs and like the size of my legs or like having like, you know, dark circles or something like that, like under my eyes, something like that. And it's funny because as a kid, you don't, like you're so comfortable in who you are, and that's what I love about children. Like to me, they're so uninhibited and just like living their best life and doing their own thing. And I feel like it's society that like craps on us, you know, and like makes us aware of things about us that maybe society deems as like not beautiful or awkward or different. And I don't know, like that to me is something that really stands out. And I have like tons of nieces and nephews now, and I'm so intentional about just telling them like how beautiful they are, right? And how much I love them. And because who cares about, you know, these really small things that may like make us appear different. And that was something about my childhood that I look back, and as an adult, I don't want to be that person.
Yeah, well, and you're not, because I was just thinking in my mind, you already broke the sort of pattern of an aunt or a family member, because I think we talk a lot about society, and then I think, and society, and we should, and society lives, like we absorb those messages, right? So your aunts perhaps absorb those messages, believe them, and then pass them on. Yeah. And I think just that mindfulness of like stopping that, how amazing for your nieces and nephews to know, like to grow up with you, you know, and you're living a different experience, and you likely would not maybe share some of those beliefs with them.
Yeah, it was definitely a reflection of probably how your aunts were feeling.
Oh yeah.
Because my family, so my dad's side is the Lawrences, so we had the Lawrence bum. Like the Lawrence legs, the Lawrence bum, everyone was pear-shaped. And so literally they saw it as a curse. They called it the curse of the Lawrence bum. And you know, we played into it and we kind of joked about it in the sense that every time my grandma would bend over, we'd go, total eclipse.
Oh my God,
you know?
I can't.
It was like, everyone had these wide hips. And so I was terrified to get the Lawrence curse, and all my aunts were like, well, it's going to happen. You know, one day you're going to turn around and then it's, you know.
It's going to follow you the rest of your life.
Literally be right behind you. And so the flip side of that was being in these like global billboard campaigns, flaunting and like being confident about this shape that they thought was a curse. And it was crazy because when I did the American Eagle, the first jean campaign, and I actually did this like hip hop pose, I started getting images of my aunts doing it. And then being like, wow, we can't believe that, like, obviously, you know, you're securing a bag from the bum. But also just like you're embracing it and it's getting celebrated. And it's just like, I guess I wish I would have known that ironically, it would actually be kind of a point of difference and something to celebrate. And
but how amazing for them, like for their, you know, niece to impart that on them as adults, right?
I think breaking those sort of generational curses or societal pass downs is like is really, I think, the joy of growing up, actually. And so when we talk to young people, I don't know, you were talking about, sometimes when they look at the potentiality of their life, it feels long, but it's really short, right? They're looking at just, the near future and kind of what's happening. And I think some of the things we get from, I don't know, aging, growing, getting better in our life is you get to look back and you get to kind of make new choices.
I also did formulate a boy haters club at school. I was like very anti-boys.
Okay.
And I think that I wish I'd taken more time to get to understand boys and men, because
what prompted the boy hater club?
I mean, they just smelled and they did stupid things, and I was just so above that and so much more mature. I would say that was probably from like the age of 10 or maybe even 9, maybe like 9, 10 to probably like 12, 13. And then being confused and not giving the time to understand what having a relationship with a boy would mean. So I think that was very confusing for me, and at the same time being confused about my body, that the multitude of confusion culminated in me thinking that this body was just a sexually attractive thing, and that's how I would get the attention. My poor dad definitely was not happy with the way I dressed, and like I rebelled against that. And it was very confusing. I got slut shamed at school, from older kids, because again, I didn't know, and just trying to navigate that was quite tricky.
I would imagine.
I think that becomes a lot of girls' identity around their body and what its purpose is. I was thinking about the word that you used about sort of driven when you were a kid, and I'm curious, as we kind of move from like our origin stories and the experiences that kind of formed us young, when you think about the drive that you've needed to have in your life to achieve the things that you've achieved, can we talk a little bit about that, like where you source that from? I know there's things that are inside of you innately, but in your world, what are some formidable relationships that you've had, maybe a person or an experience that's really broken through to you and changed the way you think about your life or helped you with that drive?
I mean, I've had some like super difficult moments where, whether it was as a kid or even like in my professional life as an athlete, where the mistreatment that I felt from like peers was so heavy. And I think as like a person who was emotional, it was really difficult, right? As a kid, to be bullied like relentlessly for things that are out of your control, I think we're hard, and that's why I just decided to kind of look inward in a way where I could just rely on myself, right? I was just like, well, they don't like me. I can't do anything about it. So let me just like, put my head down and just learn to be really good at whatever it is I'm doing, whether that was like in the classroom, whether that was in sport. And to me, sport just became this like comfort zone and this safe haven for me, where I was able to express myself, in a way where I didn't feel like I was facing any judgment. And then later in life, like as a professional athlete, to have these obstacles thrown in front of me and to feel what I felt as a kid, right? This kind of mean girl energy from my peers, from teammates, even from coaches. And what, to be honest, it's past bullying. I think it's almost like forms of harassment.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's so difficult, right? And like, how do you deal with it? And for me, it's tough for me to talk about, because I almost feel like I have PTSD a bit in dealing with it. But I suffered from depression for 2 years, and trying to navigate this space of like wanting to compete and wanting to have this presence, but facing so much pushback. And it's like, how do you deal with that? Where does that drive come from? And for me, I was desperate to create a space where people would feel, people who've ever felt othered, and people in sport to find their place. And maybe they find that inspiration through my journey, right? I knew something was wrong with the idea of it being so one-sided, only, certain people being represented in my sport. And I was like, okay, I don't know if it's possible, because to me, the Olympics was so insurmountable. It was almost like if I said it out loud, it would disappear. That's how much of a dream it felt. So it was like, I don't know if this is possible, but I'm going to like break my back to try to get there, but not for me. I felt like it was so so that it would be possible down the road for someone who looked like me.
That's an incredible foresight to have, though, as a young person, I think, and somebody feeling. And I actually think your comment about PTSD, I happen to feel for myself is true. I think those who've been bullied, and I would count myself amongst that as well, and not just bullied as a child, bullied in other ways, harassed in other ways. I think PTSD is a real experience from that. And I don't think we talk about that very much. You know, it's not just, we talk a lot about bullying stories in the world, and it's always like some triumphant, and then I learned to love myself and life got better. But it's really deep and layered for what you were just talking about. It was a motivator. It was a shield. It was, for me, for just speaking about myself, it was words that I used as weapons against myself over and over after the experience was done. I absorbed some of that language or the way that I was treated, and I believed that to be what I was worth in doing. And so I think the healing from that is remarkable. And then because I'm also just learning about you now, so this is incredible, but when I'm hearing, like, then you couple that with, you have a skill and a gift, and you train as an athlete to go towards something that feels so far away. Did you have, like, what were moments like in your head as you got closer to that moment? Did you have to talk to yourself or kind of say to yourself, like, this is going to happen, or I can get there? Like, how do you reconcile all the voices that might have been going on at the time?
So in those moments that you speak of, right, where you're on this journey, think of, so for me, I would say 2 years before Olympic qualifiers is when, like, I feel like the depression was really bad.
Yeah.
And at some point in my life, and I don't even know what happened, where this epiphany kind of came from, but a flip, like, switched in my mind where I decided I was no longer going to live based on whether or not these people cared for me or liked me or appreciated or valued what I brought to the table as their teammate. I decided, you know what, I'm just going to, like, go out here and, like, exist, you know, and I'm going to be happy in existing in myself. And I just felt so freeing, right? This decision that, to be honest, I felt like was always there, because I feel like I developed that as a kid, right? And somewhere along this journey, I lost it. And then I got back to a point where I was just, you know, kind of content with myself, and I wasn't going to allow how they thought of me, or, you know, even my athletic abilities. I wasn't going to allow that to define me. Like, throughout my career, I was told that, you know, I wasn't capable of thinking tactically, and no one ever said it, but they thought that because I was African American, right? Because we are, you know, seen as being, like, quote unquote strong, and, like, you can bring your strength, but, like, you're limited, right, because you don't have the strategy. And it's crazy, because I feel like if I learned, I became one of the best fencers in the world through being able to fence tactically. And imagine having that to navigate through sport with that mental warfare of, you know, being told that you're not capable over and over and over again, or even, you know, people seeing the team's loss as always being your fault, right? And I think it was just efforts to kind of push you out, and so that almost that you, like, self-sabotage, where you go down this emotional kind of hole of, I'm not capable, like, is it really my fault? I actually can't do it, and maybe you walk away. And I think there's something to be said for just showing up for yourself, and I really believe in the power of self. And I feel like it's such a new phenomenon, right? Like, you hear all these buzzwords that are attached to the idea of self, but I just truly believe in just showing up for yourself and learning that you don't need other people. Like, that may sound super selfish, but to me, it's like, no, actually, I don't need your approval. I don't seek your approval. I know that it's something that I have inside. And for me, like, I felt like I discovered that as a kid.
Yeah, it's incredible. Iskra, who's been a really formidable person in your life and experience that has kind of really shaped not just, like, who you are, but really shaped how you believe about yourself?
That's a good question. I obviously think that my family, but I guess a more interesting person who came into my life was my agent, Gary. And so I read about his story, and he was from Massachusetts, grew up in a trailer park. And his mom is, like, one of 20. And when he grew up, he was bullied for his sexuality, and his best friend, she was 6'2", and she was a plus-size woman. And he always said, I need to do something in this world that makes her feel beautiful. She was bullied, and she never felt beautiful. And so he got into the industry as a male model, realized that wasn't the side he wanted to be on, and he became an agent. And essentially, he propositions to Ford that we should diversify, why aren't we representing different sized women? And so this is over 25 years ago now.
Wow.
And he started the plus size board at Ford, and he revolutionized the whole industry. Every plus size model you can ever think of, he found, and he built that career. And what was wonderful was that it came from that place of him realizing, and you know,
personal for him.
Very personal, but who would have known a gay man from Massachusetts could revolutionize how women feel about themselves and create the plus size modeling industry. Like that for me proved that really anyone can do anything, especially when it comes from that pure place. When it's driven by the urge to help someone else or do better, and so I think I felt powerless within the industry. I felt invisible. I felt like because I didn't fit those measurements, you know, I was a nobody. And I would go into a room and, you know, you get looked over, or your book, you show your modeling book, and then they'll just like say no, or just put, you know, move their hand and just kind of say get out. And again, getting body shamed for my size, and I was still so slim. I just wasn't slim enough. And so when I met Gary and I saw what he did, and he had, how did he know to start that or do that, or that he could even create that kind of a change? Is he still your agent today? He's still my agent today. And so I think it gave me the drive to think, well, if he could have done that, what can I do? What can I do if I'm vocal? What can I do if I take these strides to branch out and be different? And, you know, going online and, well, flipping the finger up at fat shamers. He did call me and he was like, you might have ruined your career. Like brands don't, you know, no model was like giving people the middle finger and talking about, or saying I don't want to be retouched. You know, that alienated me from so many brands, so many editorials, so many opportunities. But
it also is really leading edge to where we are at the time, which was women are tired of being the subjects of other people's stories. They want to be their own. You know?
I gave myself permission. I gave myself permission. I was like, this is how I feel and how I need to move in this world. And if I'm not, then I'm not living fully. I'm not really truly living in my purpose if I'm constantly trying to, you know, not take up too much space and not be vocal about the things that I believe in. And like, as women, we're often silenced. And again, I know that I'm in a very privileged position. Being a white, able-bodied woman, I have all the opportunity, you know, stacked in my favor. So as my career kind of changed and navigated, it then became the opportunity for, I call myself like someone who can come into a brand and you can dip your toe in with me. Dip your toe in, but this is just so you can open the door up so that you can become even more inclusive. I'll hold your hand through it if you're scared. I know. It shouldn't be scary because you're essentially trying to represent what the world looks like. And for some reason, people have been terrified of that. And I think that it's the shift of power from the archaic and the patriarchy. And it sounds extreme to try and put the two in the same conversation, but it's ingrained that if we keep women silenced in their place and don't believe that they can all be powerful, then it remains that the power stays in one place. So I think that no matter what industry you're in, if it's in sport, being vocal, living authentically as yourself and being unapologetic and showing up and taking up space is just how we all move forward.
I think too, this is part of what the collective voice can help with. And when we talk, when I hear inclusion and belonging, when I think about designing or developing a world in my own life or worlds in the companies that I work with, much to your point, I think it is about the collective. Like I can do the work that I do better because of you and because of you being exactly who you are. And I think there's something quite defiant about that, having lived through some of the fire of judgment and ostracization and harassment and brutality, quite frankly, because the things that people said to you and certainly the way that you were behaved with and the way people thought, it's brutal. And it can be brutal on our souls and our spirits. And I also think when I talk to really high achieving, powerful people, there's something that is circumstantial that has shaped them. And there's something sort of you can't wrap your fingers around, right? Which I asked about the origin story, because there's just this magic, I think, about...
It's like the stars aligned and everything had to happen in that moment in order...
Every no had to happen.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
And we have to get used to knowing how to navigate those because they're not going to go away. No. That's what I wanted to talk about now, because you both are I'm definitely at a pivot place in my life and my career. I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. I've made up this whole career. I've never, worked essentially for anybody else except for learners in the mall for 5 days.
I was going to say on stage, I was going to say something like, we've all made that mistake. And I don't want to offend anybody who was in that field. But I, in my senior year of high school, I did retail, and I was like, oh my God, never again.
I found my calling through that because I graduated with all these degrees and I had just done a program. I was an activist on campus. I had just protested institutionalized sexual harassment at Penn State, and it had gone on MTV. And that was a time when MTV, it aired it like 300 times a day. And I moved to Indianapolis because I was in love at the time. I was in a relationship from 18 to 27 with my college boyfriend. It's a long time. It's like 9 years, like formidable years. And I moved to Indianapolis and I had all these degrees and all these ideas, and I had no idea what to do with them because there wasn't a path charted. I was like, do I do children's theater? Like, is activism? I didn't even think about activism as something that paid. So I went and worked at the mall, and my calling was, I think my wake up was, I would spend more time in the dressing room with young women talking about body image as they would have meltdowns in the dressing room because they couldn't fit into the clothes or they didn't know how to dress themselves. And then I had a moment where I had two girls. I was in Indianapolis and I did not live there. I had just moved there. You know, I didn't know anybody. And I had two girls who came in who had seen that MTV clip. And they recognized me because it just aired that summer, and they told me their stories of being assaulted on campus and the connectivity. And if you really go back in time and you think that was 1995, right? We didn't have an opportunity to know our collective stories back then. But I remember moments like that were the fuel that kept me going to be like, well, okay, there's got to be something different for me to do in the world. Like I've got to get out there. So I've been this this journey's been really circuitous. You know, I've done all these different things. I've written for magazines. I've done TV stuff. Like I've done all this stuff, and now I'm at this pivot point, right? This growing deeper place, which is why I wanted to have these conversations. And I wanted to ask you both, because you each have these incredible credentials right now in your life, these achievements that we've accomplished. And I want to know what pivoting feels like. Like I want to know, Ibtihaj, like what it feels like after the Olympics and what it feels like from an identity standpoint of what comes next. And I know Iskra too, when we get to it, you know, you're pivoting too in your work. And I think I'm looking for the pivot convo, right? I want to find that collective voice of what happens when you do achieve something you've worked for.
Right.
Then what?
Yeah, right. I'm like, have you been talking to my mom? It's kind of scary, to be honest.
It's terrifying.
It's so terrifying because I've been an athlete like my whole life. I started fencing at 12 and at 32 decided, okay, all done. Like I knew on the podium at the Olympics that I was done. Like I could feel it.
Whoa.
Like the love.
What did that feel like?
I felt relieved. I felt like I had worked so hard and it was all so impossible. And like, to me, even that moment, I'm like, is this happening? This is so pinned. I'm like, do I cry?
Were you present when you were on the podium? Could you be present?
I remember, even watching videos, I'm shaking my head because it's like, man, is this happening? Wow. Like my family's there. Like my dad had probably only seen me fence like maybe, I would say a modest guess is like 6 times in my life. Oh yeah. So to have like even my nephew, who at the time I think was 6, you know, to have him there and perhaps for him, for a sports hero in his life to be a woman, it was so meaningful to me. But anyway, I mean, to me, like just embarking on something new when you've done something for so long, for like so much of my life, it's terrifying. Like I don't know, like if I'm going to be successful in these next, you know, pieces in my life. And I think as someone who's always been super driven and who, you know, wants nothing but like, you know, I can only give 100% because I'm like full throttle, pedal to the metal, type A personality, but I also want it to be perfect and I want it to be well done. And I think there's this fear that, you know, will I be amazing at it? I don't know.
What is that, do you think? Like, what do you want to do next, or what are you doing?
So I started a clothing company about 5 years ago. It's called Luella. My sisters and I do modest clothing. I moved out to LA to run the clothing line. Okay. It's so much fun. I love it because I feel like I'm providing a service. Like there's no one who's doing modest clothing, at least 5 years. It wasn't doing modest clothing successfully. It wasn't affordable. It wasn't always fashionable. And I wanted it to be homegrown. I wanted it to be manufactured in the United States. So that's been an amazing project to work on. But also I'm an author, right? I'm on my 3rd book. And again, as someone who's just, I want to win an award at the end of the day. I'm like, what award can I win? Like in my 1st book, I wasn't a New York Times bestseller. My 2nd book, I wasn't. So I was like, 3rd one's it.
3rd's the charm,
baby. 3rd's the charm. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's one of these cool things about, and to Iskra's point about having like good management, having people who are part of your team who believe in the message that you want to impart and what the passion projects. And I feel like I just have such a good team behind me that understands that I want to use my platform in meaningful ways. I want to move the needle. I want, to always be progressive in the things that I say and the things that I do. And I want to have impact. And I feel like I'm excited for what's next because I know I have like a good group of people around me.
That's imperative, I think.
Yeah.
And what do you do? I'm curious, how do you create grace and space for yourself in the journey to the achievement, right? How do you navigate in those moments where the voice of drive is like, I want to win this award and it's got to be this and all that kind of stuff? Because I share that too. And I'm curious, what does the off moment sound like when you're trying to maybe create space to not freak out about that if it doesn't happen? Like,
well, I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily thinking about it all the time. I would say that I'm not at all. I just feel like if you put in that desire and that hunger, if you put it into the passion and the project that you're working on, I think the results kind of speak for themselves. Because if your personality is anything like mine, we're just like, this needs to be amazing. Like, and I'm going to work and build with this team or this group that is working towards this goal of it being amazing. That what you can create, and like what you're capable of. So at the end of this long road, I know that it's going to be amazing. I'm just looking forward to that moment, and I'm all about appreciating the moment. Like we spoke earlier about knowing that you have a short window here, right? And knowing that no matter what happens, I feel like it's all written anyway. It's going to happen the way it's supposed to. And I don't know, I feel very chill as I get older.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Same.
Like, I feel like I'm morphing into my parents. Like, I'm seeing my parents in me.
Yeah.
Because, like, I don't know, there were things, like, when I was younger, the way that I perceive things are so much different now. Like, only 34. But I just feel like, I don't know.
As the elder of the group, I will say, I think that does happen. And I think that's beautiful and a level of conversation we don't always get to talk about. Like there is I wouldn't say it's a chilling out, because I also feel like you can maintain that competitive edge and that drive and that desire. But I feel like that what you're describing to me is wisdom. It's wisdom of life earned and time spent and experiences had, horrible or not, right? I mean, it's what we learn from. And that's the stuff I wish sometimes I want to talk to younger people about, even though it's hard, because when we were young, we were like, like eyes on the prize. But I do feel like this generation, because of social media and because of connectivity and the collective voice, they have more access to these conversations. And God, I wish I would have heard some perspective to know that you're not, kind of alone in all these different stages. But I cherish that wisdom now as we get older. I think it's pretty fucking awesome.
Right. Yeah. There's like an abundance of reinvention that you can do in your life.
Well, you're about ready to go through a major change, Mama.
Right?
Yes.
I know. What is that? What does that feel like, the pivot? Because you're on the precipice of wonderful and amazing and big things.
Big things. I mean, I definitely cried when I found out, and they weren't happy tears. I'd be the first to admit they were, I'm not going to swear, but they were just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, am I ready for this? What's the rest of my life going to look like now? This is something that I dreamed of and hoped for, but not right now.
Right.
And luckily I had a great partner who just held me, and he said, we've got this. Let's talk about this. And we went through this really wonderful process. I mean, because he's someone who goes to therapy.
I love therapy. I don't go, but I'm like, sign me up.
You don't?
I need to go, right?
Yeah. I go 3 times a week right now.
Oh my gosh.
So we literally had a therapy session, the two of us, and we both promised each other that we would not pretend that we would have this all together, and then it would be happy and just if it was hard, please tell each other. If it sucks, we need to tell each other. And so I think there's always this expectation. And I get why, because it can be very hard for some people to conceive, and people have worked for years and years to make it happen.
And you were not together very, very long.
No,
either,
just
right?
over a year.
Yeah.
And so there's that conception of this should be the best day of your life, which obviously it is now.
Yes.
But it didn't feel like that at the time. It felt like my whole future was changing without my permission.
Right.
Without me deciding that this is when I would change it.
Right.
And that is terrifying, especially if you come from, a competitive place. Like I'm a competitive person. I like everything on my own time, and I like to be in control of everything. And then I was like, this is the biggest thing in my life, and I haven't been able to control it.
Yeah.
So, we did this. We found these amazing questions online, because the important thing as well is when you find out you're pregnant, you're not thinking, am I ready to be pregnant for 9 months?
Right.
What does that, it's like, no.
Isn't
Are
it
you ready to
technically
be?
10 months?
It is technically,
Yeah.
Are you ready to be a parent?
Yes,
Yeah.
for
For
sure.
the rest of your
Right.
life.
Wow.
But we spend so much
Wow.
time focusing on just pregnancy
The
for
pregnancy,
women
yeah.
versus like the intentionality of raising a human in the
Right.
world.
Raising a human.
Yep.
Wow.
Have I got everything that I need in my life to be able to do that?
Do you worry about that?
We did,
Yeah.
and then we freaked out over it.
Yeah.
And as I'm the breadwinner, and my partner was also like, I don't feel like I'm financially in the place to do that. And I was like, no, but together we can do it,
Right.
and the support network we have, and so we just had some really real conversations,
Yeah.
and we asked each other questions. We went off and did separate notes about how we were feeling and the things we were scared of, and then we shared them with each other.
That's
and
incredible.
yeah, we asked each
I
other.
love that.
Yeah, we found these questions online about like, are you ready to not put yourself first? Are you ready to? And so, I mean, that was revolutionary for me, because my previous partners, I would never be able to communicate like that with them.
Right.
And that was also, again, me evolving, realizing that's what I needed in a relationship and wanted in a
Yes.
relationship, and was seeking out.
Yes. That's
so
incredible.
much.
I mean, I was just sitting here thinking, look, I don't have kids. I don't want to have kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to make the world better for your kids. But what I appreciate, because I do work with kids, is again, going back to the original, like the intentionality that you have as partners, right? To be prepared for some of these things, I think is remarkable.
Yeah.
Right. And I think your child and all of the ways that they'll experience the world, to have parents who are willing to work through it, to show a process, to kind of go on that journey too, to not feel like you have it all together.
Yeah.
How does it feel like, as you look at your scope of business and the world that you're creating for yourself, you're also pivoting in that and bringing things to the world? Like the change of being the object of somebody's photography and has changed into you driving an industry towards more inclusivity and change and being a voice in so many ways. What does the next pivot look like or feel like?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because I've always felt that even though I was taking control of my narrative, the narrative was still controlled by the industry.
Yep.
As I was hand-holding it in the direction that I wanted, but I was still at their mercy. There was still people who were the gatekeepers. And so my drive and goal has been to, how do I say it, diversify the gatekeepers and potentially become one of the gatekeepers, so I can then change the future of what that looks like in that landscape. So again, like you, starting your own brand, what does that look like? How can it be unique and different? How can it represent everything that I've always wanted to see? So that has obviously been, a huge passion I've been working on for a long time. And as baby came, everything did get pushed back, because they come first. But at the same time, I know that does have to be a priority, because I want to have control of what my life looks like. So it can be on my terms. Where do I want to live? What hours do I want to work? How do I want to travel? Because ever since I was 17, that my whole every day, my diary, my calendar has been held by someone else. Has been held by an agency that says, tomorrow you're going here and you're doing this. And it's like, I need that power, in my hands.
It's so incredible. I was just sitting here thinking, I know the podcast is titled We're All Gonna Die Anyway. I feel like we should be like 3 control freaks on the road to freedom and to possibility, because I'm feeling happy about one, just because you and I just met, Ibtihaj, and I'm so grateful for how open you are and what you're choosing to share. And for me, and I know and love Iskra, and I'm getting to know her better, and I feel like this is the part and place where I'm at in my life where I value the depth and where we can go to really see people and to know that we're not alone in that in that journey. And so when I titled this, the podcast, it was because I think, I had a friend who was actually a client. So I had this client who I knew for maybe just a month or two before she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And she was a young mom of 3. She, she was 44 years old at the time. So she was my age when I knew her. So she was a peer. And the story goes in that, like, she decided to not get treatment. And so I went, I got a phone call from her husband, and who asked me to come and see her. And I didn't know her very well. At all. I never had a meal with her. I never went to the movies with her. She was my client. I was hired to help with her company, and she was my contact. And I ended up spending the last 7 weeks of her life with her. And we became friends as she was dying. And it like remarkably just changed my life, because while she was still able to communicate and share, while we were sitting in her backyard, her 3 kids are running around playing, they were at the time, I think 5 and 7 and 10, and she had young children. And I asked her name is Myra, and I asked her, I didn't know her very well, so I was nervous to ask her this, but I said, could you tell me what you're thinking about? The doctor had given her like 2 months to live. And, I said, could you just, if you could, would you tell me what you're thinking about when you know that this timeline has been given to you? And she said 3 things that I will never forget, and I think it's just been in my body since. So she said, number 1, that she spent too much time on toxic people, worrying about what people thought of her, worrying about, and that included some of her own family members, right? That she had just spent too much time worrying about what people thought. That was the first thing she said was, man, I wished I didn't spend that much time. The second was, because of her physical condition, she missed the joys and the simple pleasures of a healthy body. She missed what a mango tastes like. She missed, those things. And I think when you're in a healthy and able body and you hear that from somebody, it just kind of wakes you up. But the third one, and the one that I carry with me a lot, was she wished that she would have spent more time on herself and developing herself than worrying so much about matching what she thought the world wanted her to be. Yeah. And just knowing that that was like, not possible for her anymore. It's just really stuck with me that those are like the 3 things that she was carrying with her right at this moment. So it formed for me a different kind of urgency in my life, where I'm like, I want to do things. We all know we have an ending. Our physical body, ceases to exist at some point, and lots of different things for different people. And I guess for me, I'm exploring that. I'm trying to, explore what it means to be living and what it means to be having this life right now. So I guess the question I want to kind of end with is, what's an urgency for you in your life right now? What is something when you think about living really to the fullest, like what comes to mind that's urgent for you to accomplish right now, or to be, or to live? Maybe it's not even accomplishing.
Yeah. I think one thing which might sound contradictory is I want to be okay with doing less, in the sense of, I think there's always so much pressure if you are someone who is visible or has had achievements that seem quite public, to be okay with not doing stuff sometimes. Like really, I just like escape sometimes, like not being on my phone, not having to be at the beck and call of anyone else's expectations of who I should be and what I should be doing. Saying no, the power of no has been great, and just enjoying all of that, like really, baking a cake on a Sunday and just being like, that's all I need to do. That's really all I need to do right now. I don't need to be worrying about all the other things. And again, social media drives you to compare, am I doing enough? And when there is the possibility to create so much change, it can feel like a responsibility to continue to keep doing that, and to continue to keep breaking ground, or what is that, and just being okay with, if this is what it is today. And I have this saying like, not right now. I've been bringing that into my life, and that's really helped with my mental health and my calmness and my peace of mind, and not feeling like people are pulling me in 1,000 different directions. Not right now. And it's not meant to be rude, and it's not meant to be dismissive and say that you're not important. It's just like, I know that I'm important too, and this me time and this invisibility cloak I need to put on right now, that's important too. So I think that is something I've really learned. And the abundance of time, like I'm still only 29. Like when I think back to all the things I've done, and lived in Turkey, who knows why, because I lived in this awful model house, or I got painted green and had to model being a Shrek outfit, and then at the same time I've been to the Golden Globes on a red carpet. Like who would have thought it? Like it's just, there is an abundance of things that are going to happen.
That's right.
If it doesn't have to be today, that's absolutely fine.
Yes. Not right now is also really powerful because it has possibility in it.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's
so, say when.
And so fitting for Iskra because she's so sweet and like would never say no, and she's like, not right now. I like live for that. I'm gonna use it. I don't know if it'll be received the same. I lost my sister recently. My older sister passed away, and it like really shook my world. It was like earth shattering to lose someone that you're close to, and for me, I think that it's taught me so much, and it's taught me to look at things from the perspective of like gifts, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, I lost my sister, but there's so much blessing in that moment, right? It taught me the opportunity to love the people around me, like, so much more deeply and intentionally. But also, my sister left a daughter. My niece, who just turned 4, is so much like her mom, and it's, to me, a gift to have her because I get to see my sister in her, but also it's an opportunity for me to create a better world for her.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what has been motivating me,
Yes.
you know, since my sister's passing.
Yes.
And I know it's like such an awful thing, but like you said, death happens to all of us, and
Right.
we'll all experience it. And it's so interesting because I think what I hated most is the pity that I felt from other people.
Yep.
And the way that in my mind I would shape it, I'm like, well, you're going to experience this. You just don't know when.
Right.
None of us do.
None of us do.
You're like, someone will experience this on your behalf, or you'll experience it firsthand. So even though I'm sure it comes from, like, you know, like a good place for people to feel bad for you. I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe that's part of my grieving process.
Yeah.
I kind of like, I think initially was rejecting that, and I'm like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I love my sister, and I feel it was a gift to have her for 39 years, or however, I'm 34, so to have her like my entire life at that point. And I don't know, I just feel like I just want to show up for my niece all the time, right? And I want to leave her with like these lasting memories, and I want to give her everything, and like, who cares if she's spoiled? I want to be that person to like, you know, spoil her. And I don't know, I found that it's made me a person whose glass is always half full, and I feel like I try to come from a place of positivity, because you just never know.
I feel the same way. So the interesting footnote to this story is, after Myra passed, so during that time, my husband and I, who we both consciously choose to not have children, but love to be around children, fell in love with this family in a way that I cannot describe, that I never thought would happen. And so I have now her children as my niece and nephews. Her daughter Coco is here today at this event with her girlfriends. But much like you, Ibtihaj, I felt like this, and I was not related to Myra, so it is different, but for me, what I could relate to in your story was this calling to show up for a little being in the world who was going to have experienced a loss. She was never going to really know her mom in fullness in growing up, but that we could remember her with her, and we could leave legacies with her. And for me and my husband, I mean, we became like this Jewish, Mexican, Korean, Filipino family. Like, it was this amazing mix, but we also fell in love. And when I think about, like, I wouldn't have known that love would have come from a story like that in that way.
Yeah, and so many lessons.
So many lessons and stuff that I'm still unpacking, and grief that I feel like I don't even know how I feel it, because I knew her for such a short period of time. But this is also,
how long ago was this?
2 years ago.
So recent.
So recent, but it feels like a soul connection. Like, it felt like I was divined to be there, and I didn't question that, and I held space for somebody while they were leaving the earth, which I've not had an experience of doing in that kind of way before, and I was able to do it. So anyway, I appreciate you sharing the way you shared in this, and what you shared, because I hope it lightens the load for somebody listening and watching. And I hope, you know, for everybody to know you can have all of these things, right? You can be this driven, high achieving, powerful force in the world, and we can say, not right now. And we can say,
I'm leaving with that message.
we can say, not right now. And for me, less but better. And how do we do that? So I couldn't be more heartened and thankful for you talking with me about that today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're
it's
so
a
welcome.
dream, honestly.
To be continued, shall we?
I hope so.
Definitely,
Yeah.
100%.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
everyone listening. Sending our love.
Lots of love. Thanks, guys. I think one of the most incredible things about going on this journey of conversation on a topic like we're all going to die anyway is that the title alone just gives us permission to go there. And I don't take that for granted at all, but I've been talking to people that I really love and that I know very well, and I've been talking to people that are absolute strangers to me. And what blows me away every single time is just how open both kinds of people are. The people that I know and I've built a relationship with, but also the people that have literally just met who share such deep and incredible things. So Iskra for me is like this incredible light. She always has been. I find her in her young years to be such a blazing role model and true champion for women's voices. Like if you get a chance to know her as a friend, I think one of the best parts of knowing her as a friend is that everything she puts out in her social world, she really is living in her personal life, which is just so rare. And I thought, her being able to share, especially as somebody in the public eye, and especially somebody who's bringing a baby into the world, that she's really longing for this slowdown, that she's longing to not be as on perhaps all the time, or giving herself permission to kind of be off in ways that our current hustle culture doesn't always allow. And so I think it's always really important when you hear that from somebody who's so accomplished and so out there, that's also an internal desire. So I really took that away from this conversation. But I have to tell you, the openness that Ibtihaj chose to have in sharing with me and with us the loss of her sister, the legacy that she's looking to build and leave for her sister's daughter, and just how deeply and profoundly that loss felt for her. I was not expecting her to share something like that in this conversation. I mean, I don't know her, and I think trust is earned with actions over time. But I am so grateful that she went there, and that she went there in the course of this conversation in a way that I hope those of you listening and watching could find yourself in parts of that story. And I think when people are that vulnerable and authentic, we get more permission to do that for ourselves. So I will never, ever take for granted the depth of these conversations. It's what my heart was hoping for and why I was doing the show to begin with. But it's never lost on me when it shows up like this, just how deeply grateful I am. So thanks for going on this journey with me, and I hope you enjoyed. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Weiner. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jessweiner.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jessweiner.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.